Hello and welcome to the YYC Soccer Podcast. My name is Jason Kmet and my co-host is Scott Strasser. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Jason. Good to be back for another episode. I will keep it as brief as that, as I know it's going to be a jam-packed episode this week.
Yes, lots to talk about. But if you are a new listener, what is the YYC Soccer Podcast all about?
We focus on soccer in Calgary at the amateur, collegiate, and professional levels. We talk about the teams and the players from the city's soccer community, from the grassroots and amateur leagues up to the university and professional level.
In this episode, there is a bunch of things to talk about. I think there is a lot of Calgary news we want to go over. We're also going to talk a little bit about Foothills WFC. They had two losses over their road trip on the weekend. Dom Zator made his Canadian men's national team debut on Tuesday against Guadalupe in the Gold Cup. And we're also going to have an interview with a person from the past of Calgary soccer. His name is Chris Daniel. He used to play in the CSL in the 1980s for the Calgary Kickers, and he also spent a little bit of time with the Boomers, and he's got a few really interesting stories about that time. And I've always wanted to do some history on the podcast, so we're going to get a chance to do some of that this week.
Yeah. Chris is someone I've interviewed in the past, and I really liked what he had to say about his career in soccer in Calgary in the 1980s. So he had a lot of insight about the Calgary Boomers, which was the NASL team in 1981, which he was involved with, albeit briefly. And then he had a lot to say about the Calgary Kickers, particularly their 1987 season, which, if you're familiar with Calgary soccer history, was a good year for the Kickers and for Calgary soccer. So yeah, it was exciting to chat with him again. And I know we have a lot of other stuff on the agenda, so we should get going.
So let's start off with what happened on the weekend at Spruce Meadows. There was a really good match on Saturday afternoon. We got to see the Cavs play York United, and they were able to pull off the win 2-1, a late winner by Ali Musi. And I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about that, Scott, and then we can start talking about some Jose Escalante stuff as well.
Mm-hmm. So it was a 2-1 win for Cavalry. Pretty uneventful first half, but the match did kick into gear in the second. Cavalry went up, as they've tended to do this season, with a goal for Gaute Natigny, scoring his first goal in the Canadian Premier League, which was nice to see. He's been playing on the left a little bit, and he got his just reward with a neat and tidy finish. But York responded quite quickly. Mo Babuli with a really spectacular top corner shot from outside of the 18, not that long after. So once again, Cavalry gave up a lead. But this time they were able to regain the lead later on in the last 10 minutes. Ali Musi from the right had a peach of a free kick curled into the top corner. I've seen him do that before. He's done it in PDL finals. He's done it in CPL games. And yeah, when you saw him from that range, you had a feeling like if they're going to score a winner, this might be it. And he really delivered. So kudos to Ali Musi for picking the top corner on that strike.
I think it was in the post-match press conference. He was asked, is that about as good a free kick as you could do? Like, is that about as good as it can be? And he's like, yeah.
Yeah, it was straightforward. Yeah. It was perfect placement, perfect power, got it up and over the wall. I saw him hit a very similar free kick against FC Edmonton last year from that very angle. So it seems like he likes when the ball is kind of on the corner of the box like that.
The match wrapped up, and we had Jose Escalante come on as a sub with, I'm not even sure how many minutes left, but he played out the last several minutes of the match. And then when the match was over, there was a lot of emotion on the pitch. It was all sort of presented to start with as because of his 100th appearance with the Cavs, but it just seemed like there was a little bit more going on than just a 100th appearance.
Yeah, because tweets surfaced a few days before the match from FC Motagua, which is a professional club in Honduras, where Jose Escalante is from, that basically announced him as their new player. So there was a little bit of confusion up here in Canada with fans going, hold on, is Escalante leaving? It was really unclear even after the game what the case was, and I did ask that in the press conference if Tommy Wheeldon Jr. could quash or confirm the speculation that had really erupted, and he basically couldn't give an answer at that time and said, we'll announce that when we need to. And then a few days after the game, Calgary did sort of reveal that Escalante had asked for a leave of absence to return to Honduras. It appeared to be like it might have been a family issue or something along those lines. And he is going to be playing for FC Motagua, but Calgary does still hold its contract rights. Potentially, it was potentially his farewell match. It certainly seemed like it if you looked at the scenes after the match with him kind of being, picked up by the players, the jersey with his name and 100 on the back, and like the interactions he had with his fellow teammates. And Ali Musi during the press conference as well kind of said how they wanted to win it for Escalante and give him a good sending off. So we certainly felt like, okay, this is definitely his last game for Calgary. He may return in 2024, but he may not. So there is still a little bit of uncertainty in that regard.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what to make of the whole thing. It just seems, if nothing else, it's been quite opaque. Like, it's just unclear what's going on, because I don't think any of this, it wasn't publicly reported, but it seems like this is information that wasn't exactly a big secret. People in Honduras are reporting it, and it seemed to be very clear that he was leaving. Why it wasn't directly addressed, it's hard to know. Is it having to do something with the loan deal not being fully signed, sealed, and delivered? I don't know. But it's sort of just all played out in sort of a wonky fashion.
Yeah. I have a feeling Calgary FC is not very happy with FC Motagua for announcing it the way they did with that tweet last week. That definitely made its way up to Canada. And because that definitely changed the overall mood of his 100th game. And it did turn into what felt like a farewell match. And he didn't start. He was nursing a hamstring injury, and he did only get a cameo. But I feel like Calgary was not very happy with FC Motagua, and they did come out with sort of a clarification tweet later. But again, like you said, opaque is a pretty good word to describe the overall situation. There's a hole to be filled on the left wing for Calgary, and given his performances as of late, I would expect Gaute Ntigny is going to take up that mantle.
Well, he played really, really well on the weekend. Like, I was very impressed. Like, I think that we've seen him improve as the season's gone on, but clearly he really looked like a real threat out there and got full value. Like, getting a goal, I thought, was a good reward for his work.
Yeah, because he did force an own goal earlier this season against Pacific, which he wasn't credited with, I believe. And he's gotten an assist. I remember he assisted the last home game, one of Meyer Bevin's goals. But a goal's been coming for him. He looks hungry. He's fast. He loves to dribble right at his defender and make his defender make a decision. So I think he clearly is very confident at the moment. And now that he has a goal under his belt, I'm excited to see what he does in the upcoming matches.
And then today, we're recording this on Thursday, there was kind of, I guess it's not a trade, but kind of a trade between Vancouver FC and the Cavs. Mickey Cantave, who is leaving the Cavs and going to Vancouver FC, and we're having a new player come in, and he is just a young, I think is it 19 years old, I believe?
Yeah.
His name is Mail Henry, and he's a Canadian player and has been in I believe it's the CF Montreal setup previously. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah, well, I did a little bit of Googling before and watched a highlight reel on YouTube for him. He's 19. You're correct, he's from Quebec, and he was playing in the PLQS or PLSQ, the Quebec version of League One, essentially, for CF Montreal's U23s. But he has been with Vancouver FC this season up until now. I believe he's maybe had an appearance or two. But you're right. Yeah, he's 19. I believe he was only 18 when the season started, so he only just recently turned 19. Looks like he's an attacking player, so he's either a winger or a forward based on the highlights that I saw.
I know in the comments that Tommy Wilden Jr. had after this was all solidified, he made a comment about needing some more under 21 Canadian minutes, and I believe the Cavs are I don't think they're at the bottom of the list for U21 minutes so far this year, but they are on the lower edge of it. So I think that this move was probably, at least in part, due to that. I guess I'm presuming that they think the players got some good potential, but I think that you need to meet those requirements, and they're a little bit lacking at this point on that.
No, I think you're 100% right. And we've seen that with Calgary before, where they're one of the last teams to hit that U21 minutes threshold. I also know that it's another player from Quebec, and Calgary's had a lot of success with bringing players over from CF Montreal. It seems like they have a good relationship with that club, and with Quebec in general. If you think back to Mo Farsi in 2020 and 2021, as well as Karifa Yao from I think 2021, 2022. So they're keeping that pipeline going. There's not an oil pipeline between Alberta and Quebec, but there's a soccer player pipeline. So,
well, I presume at this point he'll be eligible for selection relatively soon. I don't know how quickly we'll see him, considering he'll be new to training and still a relatively inexperienced player. But I guess someone that I think is pretty safe to assume we're going to be seeing on the pitch in the not too distant future.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the player that went the other way, Mickey Kintav, hadn't been playing very much lately in the last handful of matches. His season, he was playing at the start of the season, and he had that screamer of a goal in Calgary's first game. But I'd kind of forgotten about him, to be honest, because, it seemed like he wasn't getting on the pitch, and I'm not sure if that was due to injury or if he was just out of favor. And again, we don't know all the details behind the reason for what looks very much like a player-for-player trade, which is not really a soccer thing generally. But best of luck to Kintav as he moves over to Vancouver FC. I did think he had some really good performances for Calgary in the past, but we'll see how the new guy does.
Yeah, and I think that now that the transfer window is open, you got to think that they're going to look at replacing Escalante at some level. There is a foreign player slot available, and I would think even from a salary cap perspective, Escalante was probably one of the higher paid players on the team. So you got to think out there somewhere there's going to be a wide player that they can bring in, maybe has some experience. I kind of feel like you touched on this earlier, Scott, several weeks back, about how maybe there isn't quite enough experience on this team. Like, a lot of the players are younger. I think Escalante, being one of the longest serving players and also being one of the veterans in general in the pro game, I would expect that they're looking for someone who has some kind of experience to bring into the club.
Yeah, someone who's upper 20s or early 30s, maybe has played in the CPL before. I think there's some CONCACAF players who maybe be brought into the league. I'm not sure, but that's kind of outside of my understanding. But I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, cap space. But no, Escalante was a member of Calgary's leadership team, I believe. So definitely a big loss.
Yeah, and I know just myself, he's certainly one of the players that I've really enjoyed watching over the years. But that's how it goes. So
yeah, definitely a flair player.
And let's talk about what happened with Foothills WFC. Now, they went down to California to play a couple matches, and I believe that when we were recording our last podcast, they were just releasing the result where they had lost to LAFC. And then they were off to Santa Clarita a couple days later, and they lost 3-0 in that match. Mm-hmm. So that's quite a shocking result for them. I realize Santa Clarita they're a good side and everything, but still, we haven't seen a 3-0 loss for this side in a while.
Oh, I don't even remember the last time. But no, that's I'm not too sure what happened to Foothills down in LA this past weekend. Obviously, after the first game, Maya Jones was back in the lineup. We've talked about her and her impact on the team, but having her back wasn't enough to rebound from that loss to LA on Thursday. And quite the poor results. Overall, I mean, looking at the standings, they're still in first place in the West Division with a 5-2 record. But Santa Clarita is 3 points off, and they have 2 games in hand. So if you're Santa Clarita, you could probably think about mounting a comeback in terms of league standing right now. But I'm curious I'd be curious to hear from Foothills coaching staff or some of the players to talk about kind of what went wrong over the weekend.
Yeah, it's certainly out of character, and I guess you can't be on a winning streak forever. But yeah, it's still surprising to see those two losses.
Yeah, because that was a 15-game winning streak that we'd mentioned. If you date it back to 2022 when they went 10-0 in the regular season.
Let's move on to talking a little bit about the Canadian men's national team, and more to the point about Dom Zator. He finally had a chance to get on the field and win his first cap in the match on Tuesday against Guadalupe. I believe he got in the last few minutes of the match. So congrats to our former guest and on the podcast, and somebody that I think we followed along for quite a few years now. And it's good to see him achieve this goal that very clearly was top of mind for him when we talked to him.
Yeah, Dominic is a former opponent and teammate of mine, so it was really cool to see. I don't think anyone else I've played with or against has played for the men's national team, but he has now. It was awesome to see. Yeah, you're right. He got subbed in. It was the 88th or 89th minute. Obviously, the match didn't turn out very well because shortly after he came on, Guadalupe equalized and the match ended 2-2. You can't leave out the fact that Zator was involved in the play that led to Guadalupe's scoring their equalizer, as it was his man who played the ball in that resulted in the own goal. So the celebratory nature of his debut was snuffed out a little bit there, but I'm sure he's going to play again this Gold Cup, and hopefully the results will be reversed. I believe Canada plays Cuba in one of their games, and then the other one,
I believe it's Guatemala, and that one is on Saturday night, I think.
Okay, so Guatemala first, and then Cuba on July 4th is their group schedule. So beatable opponents, I believe. But no, it was really great to see Zator get on the field. He's been called up a few times already, and he's been waiting for his moment. And you got to think, he's 28 now, so to be making your debut at 28, that takes some. That you have to have a never give up mentality to stick with your goals for basically the first decade of your pro career. And frankly, he's deserved this after everything he's done in Poland this season, as well as the CPL in seasons prior.
Yeah, good on him. It's good to see.
And it's beneficial that I think he's equally comfortable at right back, which seems to be where he was brought in. As well as center back, where he's played a lot of his career. So I think no matter what happens in the Canadian back line in the coming years, Zator will be an option.
Yeah. And we'll give a report next week. We'll see if Victor Laturi hits the pitch. I think there's probably a decent chance, but we'll see. And okay, let's transition over to Chris Daniel and talking a little bit about the history of soccer in Calgary, particularly in the 80s.
Yeah, so Chris Daniel, as mentioned at the beginning of the episode, he played for the Calgary Kickers, which was the Canadian Soccer League team that played in Calgary from 1987 until 1988. And they were replaced by, or more so rebranded as the Calgary Strikers for 1989, after which Calgary's involvement with the Canadian Soccer League fizzled out. But he was kind of a fixture in Calgary soccer throughout the 1980s, and he's a wealth of knowledge. And yeah, it was a really good chat with him earlier today. He had a lot to say. He had a lot to talk about. And I guess I'll let the interview kind of say the rest.
All right, let's run the interview now.
I'd like to welcome Chris Daniel to the podcast next. Chris is a former professional player who featured for Calgary's Canadian Soccer League team, the Kickers, in 1987 and 1988. He also spent some time with the Calgary Boomers, which was Calgary's NASL team, in 1981. Chris, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Look forward to it.
Yeah, you and I have chatted about your career before for a separate project. So I've known for a while that I've wanted to have you on our podcast. Before we kind of jump into it, can I kind of clarify which teams I may have not mentioned that you played with as well, maybe before a pro career?
Yeah, so you basically had it. The only thing that was exciting, I mean, I originally there was the Alberta Major League, and back then there was a team called the Calgary Kickers. That was sort of my first foray into men's soccer, and then from there I played UFC soccer, and then I had a chance after high school to play a little bit in Germany in Stuttgart, and had a wonderful experience there for a short period of time. With VfB Stuttgart. They had toured Canada in 1978, it was. And so that was kind of exciting. And then from there, I had an opportunity to play with the Boomers. Then went to university. And then towards the tail end of my career, the CSL came calling and had an opportunity to play there for a couple of years. And that was pretty much the end of my soccer career, because from there on, I moved into another sport. But certainly enjoyed my time playing soccer competitively for a better part of 10 years, from the time I was 16 to the time I was like 26, 27 years old.
I actually really want to talk about the Boomers because,
Yes.
I haven't seen as much about the Boomers. So I'm kind of curious, what was your experience like training with them? And at the time, there were some pretty big time names in the league.
Oh, yeah. I got to know who some of these guys were when I went overseas and played for a while. So I was familiar with German soccer, and I was familiar with how great these guys truly were. It wasn't a development league. It wasn't a league like the MLS where you're developing North American soccer players. It was basically a league where they brought the stars in and were hoping that it would run and become a popular sport in North America. And in some cases, it was quite successful. The talent that they had was incredible. And I got to know a number of the players while in the short stint that they were here. And one particular player that I got to know a bit was a guy by the name of Helmut Kramers, who was on the German national team that won the World Cup in 1974. He told me, he said that this league and this team in particular, towards the latter half of that season that they were here, were probably in the top half of the German Bundesliga. That's how good they were.
Yeah, that's high praise.
I mean, if you look through that roster, those guys were all former Bundesliga players, and one guy in particular. He came here when he was 26, and his name was Jürgen Röber, and he became family friends of ours. Long story, but anyway, he loved it here. He absolutely loved the mountains. He loved that the pressure wasn't there. They were still making pretty good money. I mean, Nelson Scalbani owned that team. And so people go, well, there was a lot of Europeans that came over in their, twilight years. Well, that wasn't necessarily the case. I mean, he was a 26-year-old that came from Bayern Munich, and then he played here. And then when the team folded, he went to Chicago for like one day. They traded him to Nottingham Forest, and then he went to Leverkusen and was their captain for many, many years in the Bundesliga, long after he played in the North American Soccer League. And then he became a team manager and so forth. But that kind of speaks to the talent that league was all about. And of course, when I had a chance to go with him to Santa Barbara for a couple of weeks, it was a thrill for me. But I knew what I was getting myself into about, in terms of how good these guys truly were. I mean, yeah, it was an eye opener for anybody that got called down there from a North American perspective. But the level of play was just incredible, and it was just a wonderful experience. And I look back at those times with great fondness.
I know there was quite the German connection on the Boomers, Chris,
Yep.
but I know there was also some South Americans who had played for like Boca Juniors and Colo Colo.
Yeah.
Do you remember Ramon Hector Ponce and Juan Carlos Molina and Carlos Salguero?
So yes. So basically they had three Argentinians, and then the rest of the imports, I think there was a Danish guy, Jürgen Christensen, and then all the rest were German. And then, of course, we had the sprinkling of the North American players, right? So I think they had a rule, and I think Scott, you mentioned, I thought it was two players, but I think they had three that needed to start or something like that. So they had to find room for three North American-born players. But yeah, the starters generally were all they filled the roster with non-North American players, right? So in our case with the Boomers, it was the it was Germany, and then 3 Argentinian players. So yeah, I remember exactly who those guys were: Molina and Scott Molina and Salguero. He was more of an indoor player. He was very good indoor. Actually, they were both very good indoor, better indoor than outdoor. But the Germans were the stars of that 1981 team by far.
Yeah. So fast forward about 6 years, the CSL, the Canadian Soccer League, starts up in time for 1987.
Yes.
And you were on the Calgary Kickers, which was Ron Knipschild's team. What do you recall about the Calgary Kickers?
I think at that time, certainly in my life, I was getting on, I graduated from university and starting to work. So I knew Ron. He had kind of funded a couple of local teams indoors that we had played on years before. So he called me one day and said, look, we're going to start this team. This was back in 86. We're going to play some exhibition games. Would you be interested in playing? And you know what? At that time, it wasn't about the money. It was about the opportunity to play against the best guys, certainly in Canada at that time, right? So I said, yeah, absolutely. As long as I can make it work, with work, then, I'm game to help out or play in this league. So it wasn't necessarily about signing a contract or anything like that. It was more about, hey, I got a chance to play at the highest level in Canada. So I jumped at the opportunity when Ron approached me to play for that team.
When you were playing in the CSL, were there any particular players or teammates that jump out at you that you, after all these years, sort of they spring to mind right away, whether you made connections on or off the field, or players you played against that were really formidable?
Yeah. So I don't know how Ron pulled that off, but we ended up having a really good team. We all got along. I mean, it's funny, about 2 years ago, I ended up being out in Vancouver for work. And I thought, I'm going to call our goalie, Sven Haberman, who is the funniest guy that I've ever met. And then I called Nick Gilbert, who was the top scorer in the league at that year. And the two of them said, and I know for myself when I speak for others as well, they've never had as much fun as they did that year. So, and it's not just because we were winning, but when we got together, we all hung out. We'd go to the bars after games. I shouldn't be saying that, but anyway, we'd go out, we'd have a great time, and we were close. And I think that's probably the reason why we had success that year, because we truly cared for each other and there was no belly aching or any of that stuff. We just had a common cause and we were pretty determined to win it. And we had obviously, the two guys that stick out. Well, there's probably 3 that stick out for me that kind of were the kingpins of that team. I mean, we had John Catliff, who was, I was watching one of the World Cup games and they look at all the top scorers in Canadian history. I go, holy crap, John Catliff is on there. Like he had rolled down to number 3 all time or something like that. But he was a big, big part of our team. And then Nick Gilbert was on the national team as well for a lot of years. And he won the scoring title that year. Different kind of player, but they played well together. So we had the two of the 3, arguably the best strikers in the league, playing for us. And then we had a goalie who was, 6'4", commanded the presence, was intimidating. And so those 3, I would say, would be the key guys. And then we had a national team guy by the name of Greg Kern, who was kind of our sweeper in the back. And then the rest of us were, you don't like to admit it, but you were the guys, the workhorses, the worker bees that help, put them in positions to, score goals and do whatever, right? And so we knew our roles and we knew who our stars were, and they delivered when it mattered.
Mm-hmm. And you alluded to it there, Chris, but the Kickers did, of course, win the inaugural Canadian Soccer League title in 1987.
Yeah,
at home too, playing at Muwata Stadium.
Right. Yeah.
So, other than those kind of headline makers, is there anything else you felt that made the team really strong in comparison to these teams in Vancouver, Edmonton, Hamilton, the rest of the league?
Well, I think we understood how to play our game. So Vancouver was on paper, they're probably more talented than when we were. They had, Carl Valentine and Dale Mitchell, and they had all these, top Canadian players. but we had a lot of bites to our game, and we were very, very good in key positions. So, like I said, forwards, center of the midfield, center of the back, and our goalkeeper, right? So, and the rest of us just worked. And I think we rolled towards the end of the season. I don't remember, but I'm guessing we won our last 8 or 9 games. We came from third, then we moved to second, and then we passed Vancouver, and that's why we got to hold all the playoff games. But I think we just had a real good mix of super talented guys and super hard workers that knew their role. And at the end, I didn't think, even though we were down 3-1 late to Vancouver, I kept thinking, these guys, we're going to come back on these guys, right? And we did, and we ended up winning it in overtime to get us to the final that year. Yeah, I would say it was just team camaraderie that I've never experienced before or since, was what made us in that league certainly a great team.
Yeah, and before we continue on, can you talk about the coach a little bit? Because coach for that team had some success with the Dinos in 1980. They still to this date haven't reclaimed the Canada West Championship.
I know, and I remind them about that all the time. We were the only team that have ever won that Canada West. But yeah, no, Peter Welch, I mean, he was a local guy. He'd coached us at the UFC, and so it was a logical fit that Ron picked him as a coach. And yeah, so he passed away not that long ago, maybe a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. I went to his funeral. But yeah, no, it just made sense. And he let us play. I have to give him credit for that. Like, he didn't try to put in these systems that were complicated. He just said, go guys, you guys are, just play. Just play the way you're capable of playing and you'll be fine. So he had more of a hands-off approach. He wasn't a tactical guy at all, certainly not with that team. And so I think that allowed us to really, meet our potential during that run we had in 87.
That was really a magical first season with the championship, but the second season didn't really go quite as well. It was a bit of a collapse. What would you say? What was your assessment of what happened in season 2 and how did it all sort of fall apart?
Yeah, so I don't know all the underlying reasons what happened there, but I think it was more of a financial situation than anything. Like, everybody loved playing there, but some of these guys were, expecting to be paid, right? So that was sort of the beginning of the end, right? So a lot of us, well, I shouldn't say a lot of us, certainly it didn't bother me. I know there was a number of times where Ron came up to me and said, hey, you know what? Are you okay not cashing your check? And give me a check. And I go, I know it's going to bounce, so I'm not going to cash this thing. So for me, it didn't matter. But for some of those guys, that's their livelihood. Like, there was a lot of guys that were playing university soccer at that time. So it was important that they get a summer job that paid them. And then the guys from Vancouver, those guys weren't going to come out here and not get paid or wonder if they were going to get paid. So I think then all of a sudden, Ron had some decisions to make and they were starting to draw better. Every game was a little bit better than the previous one, but it wasn't where they were, making a lot of money at the gate for this kind of stuff. Right. So I think the writing was on the wall. So, they traded Nick early. I think it was early the next year. John was gone. Sven didn't come back. Lindsey Henderson blew out his knee, so that doesn't really count there. But we had lost pretty much all the guys that we had brought in to make our team, special, right? We lost a lot of our real quality guys. And we did get some replacements, but, and they tried and they were good, but not to that level. So I knew, I'm going, okay, after 87, I saw what was going on. And I've told Ron, I said, look, you know what? I'll hang out for one more year, but I'm done. Like, I was just looking to move on, right? And I saw what kind of happened. But I think a lot of the guys didn't come back just because of financial reasons. And I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that I'm not, which was unfortunate because, it was a good team. And we had, we could have run it maybe a few more times. It was just not being able to keep the players that were originally with us in 87.
Yeah, and that kind of started the Vancouver 86ers dominance of the league for the next few years.
That's right, because Catliff went there, Sven went there. I think that was it. But those were two critical guys to our puzzle, right?
So looking at the present right now in the Calgary soccer scene today, how would you compare what the soccer was like back when you were playing with the matches we're seeing in the Canadian Premier League, the Cavalry, that sort of thing? Like, how does it all compare from your perspective?
Yeah. So, I've gone to a couple games. I haven't gone to enough games, but I've certainly enjoyed the games when I go and see them. I love the facility there. It's awesome. What a wonderful facility. We would have lucky to have played in a facility like that. But in terms of the talent, I think overall, the average guy out there, there's no plumber, there's no guys with no skill, right? They have a decent level of skill, all of them. But I don't think there's the top guys in that league, because I imagine there's no Catliffe or or Mobilio or these other guys that end up playing in leagues that were much better than, let's say, the CSL or where the Cavalry is playing, right? So I don't think that league has those kind of players. At least I haven't seen those guys. And again, it's coming from a limited knowledge base, right? It's not like I've seen a ton of games, but everybody is at a good level. They've all got a good level of skill, and they play good soccer, in my opinion. And I kind of enjoy it. I think it's a good level. It's a good league. I'd say would we have given these guys a game? Absolutely would have given them a game. Would we have beaten them? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. You think you're better than you are type thing 40 years later. But I like what I see when I go and see them. I find it very entertaining, actually. Most people say it's boring. No, those guys have all very, very good skill. And I'd love to see some of them, and it does happen, where they get bumped up to the major league, the MLS as an example, right? And that league, of course, is also very good. It wasn't as good as the North American Soccer League, but it's a very, very big step up from, the North Americans that played 30 years ago. There's a lot more good players now than there was when we played 30 years ago.
And you mentioned how you kind of hung up the cleats in 1988, 1989. What did you do after that? You mentioned another sport.
So it's interesting because if you get kids, they end up doing the same stuff as you. So I don't know if you follow my son at all or not, but anyway, so after that, I had a bit of a swimming background, and somebody says, "Hey, do you want to do the Ironman?" I go, "I'd seen it on TV," and I go, "Yeah, okay, well, sure. What? Yeah, get me. I got to buy a bike, and I got to." This was at Christmas dinner, like in 89, I think it was. Yeah, 89. They said, "Would you like to do an Ironman?" And I said, "Okay." What is it? How do I train for this thing? We ran a bit from soccer, but realized, oh my God, that's not even close to what it is that you do in an Ironman. And then I had a bit of a swimming background, which came in handy. So I got myself into triathlon, and I became more competitive and more driven by that sport than I ever did with soccer. And so even to this day, I haven't done an Ironman in a while, but I was going to try and get back to Hawaii. I've done the Ironman in Hawaii a couple of times. I've done 7 in total. The nice thing, and so I really went hardcore into triathlon. I still am hardcore when I swim race now, and I still do that. But what I liked about that sport is that I love about that sport is that what you get out at the end of the day is what you've put in before. And it's a direct correlation. Where in soccer, you got your team aspect, which is a lot of fun, but it's different. This is all you. If you're lazy one day and you don't train, it's going to show up. Where in soccer, if you have a lot of skill, you can get away with it. Or if you got a bunch of other guys that are going to work hard for you, you can get away with it. But there's none of that in some of these individual sports. So that's what I really, really love about triathlon. And I still do to this day. And now, of course, I've just been, it's very competitive at the world level in masters, right? Obviously, they go by 5-year increments, but I would say it's extremely competitive at those masters races. Like in swimming now, the top guys in the world you're racing up against are the guys, you look them up, and sure enough, they were in the 1980 Olympics or 84 Olympics or 76 Olympics, kind of my era, right? So it's kind of fun to try and see how you do against the top swimmers or the top triathletes in the world. because it's really a direct relationship on how hard am I working? Because if I'm lazy and I'm not training, yeah, you're going to get smoked. And that's the beauty of that sport. Completely different, individual versus team. Both are great in their own ways.
Cool. Well, that's quite the transition you made, Chris. But I think, yeah, we'll probably call it there. But thank you so much for coming on our podcast and talking to us about your soccer career as well as your triathlon career. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, all the best to you guys. All
right. Well, thanks again to Chris Daniel, and thanks for listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast using all the usual podcasting platforms. Head over to our website at yycsoccer.com for more information about how to subscribe or to leave a question or comment. And you can follow us on Twitter at YYC Soccer 403. Thanks for listening.